Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this video and I hope you're all doing well. Now in today's video I'm going to be doing another deep dive review into one of the albums, and today I'm going to be doing George Harrison's Living in the Material World from 1973. Now, as you may remember, a few weeks ago did a poll to decide which album I was going to review next, and Living in the Material World won by quite some distance with 45% of the vote. 33 and a third got almost 33 and a third percent. It got 31%. Somewhere in England got 15%, and Extra Texture brought up the rear with just 9% of the vote. Now, if you've been watching these deep dive review videos, you'll know the format, but if you haven't seen any of them before, I should just go through it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the album packaging, we're going to have a look at the vinyl, and then we're going to mark each track on the album a score out of 10, and at the end of that we'll add up the total score for the album, divide it by the 11 tracks that are on the album to get an average score for the album. And after that we will then slam it into Beatletone's great big album review ranking chart and see where it comes in the list of the albums that I've reviewed so far, and at the moment it looks like this. So let's kick off by having a look at the album. This is my original UK pressing that I got around 1977, so about a year into my Beatles journey I plumped for this album, and it's actually the only vinyl copy of this album that I've got. I do have the CD box that came out a few years ago with a remastered version with the extra tracks on it. This is actually George's hand, as is that on the back. And I don't know if you've seen this here. There's little Wings logo there, which is having a little friendly dig at the Wings Fun Club, where it invites you to write to the quite imaginary Jim Keltner fan club. And rather than sending a stamped address envelope, it hilariously asks you to send a stamped undressed elephant. It's a gatefold sleeve and it's in two parts. The first part there is a kind of a mock-up of the Last Supper, with all the musicians on the album sitting at the table. Ringo, Jim Keltner, Nicky Hopkins, Gary Wright, Klaus Voormann. And the second half is I don't know if you can see that, that's the list of tracks and the musicians that are on the album. So let's have a look at the vinyl. And it comes in this sort of brown inner sleeve, and you can see here, I don't know if you can see it here, I've written George Harrison Living in a Material World, and I obviously wasn't paying attention to what the album was called. I was too busy listening to it, laying on my bed and listening to it and scribbling on the inner sleeve like an idiot. Okay, so the vinyl looks like that. Nice custom label. There's a sort of a Krishna painting on side one, and on side two we've got a stretch limo. You also get the words in the album. It comes in this sort of mini booklet with another Krishna painting there on the front, and the Krishna logo or emblem on the back, and then inside you've got the lyrics to all the songs. So very nice packaging, and so it was much anticipated album after the huge success of All Things Must Pass. Everyone was really interested to see what George would come up with next, probably after All Things Must Pass, had kind of won the battle of the first solo albums. And George was very busy in 1972 with the concert for Bangladesh, trying to get that album and documentary film out, and he didn't have time to record the album, even though most of the songs were written during 1972. Originally, it was going to be produced by Phil Spector, but Phil, being Phil, unreliable as ever, was never available. So it got to the point where George thought, well, if I don't produce this myself, I'm never going to get it out. So that's exactly what he did. And the production on this album is excellent. It's a much pared down sort of lineup of musicians and production style compared with All Things Must Pass, but it works really well. George is the only guitarist on this album, so he plays all the rhythm and all the lead guitar parts himself. We've got Ringo and Jim Keltner on drums. We've got Nicky Hopkins on piano and Gary Wright on organ and Klaus Voormann on bass. And that's kind of the main musicians that play on this album. So shall we get on and have a look at the tracks? So the album kicks off with the utterly fantastic Gimme Love, Gimme Peace on Earth, big hit single, number 1 in America, number 2 in Canada, number 8 in the UK, so a big hit. And no one would blame you if you listened to the intro of that song and thought acoustic guitar strumming, lead slide guitar playing over the top. This is an attempt to try and emulate the success of My Sweet Lord. No one would blame you for thinking that, but in my opinion, this is a much better song than My Sweet Lord, and it has the advantage that George Harrison actually came up with the melody himself. Brilliant song, 3 guitar solos in it, every one of them a beauty, some fantastic piano from Nicky Hopkins, a really catchy, upbeat melody, and I really love that part where he kind of slows it down slightly and punctuates the lyric, won't you please, oh won't you. That really adds some nice variation to the song. So Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, I'm giving 10 out of 10. It's a great start. So track 2 is Sue Me, Sue You Blues, and it's a title that promises 2 things. 1, it's a blues song, and 2, it's a song about getting sued, and it delivers on both promises. The people getting sued in this particular song are George, John and Ringo, and the plaintiff being Paul. So it's a song about the ongoing Beatles court cases, and George is sick to the back teeth of them by the time he wrote this song, and it's a very bitter song with bitter lyrics. You serve me and I'll serve you, swing your partners, all get screwed, bring your lawyer and I'll bring mine, and get together and we can have a bad time. But it's a song with superb musicianship, fantastic slide guitar from George on here, lovely piano from Nicky Hopkins, and some superb drumming from Jim Keltner as well. As it gets to sort of verse 2, it ramps up even more in its bitterness. It's affidavit, swearing time, sign here on the dotted line, hold the Bible in your hand, and all that's left is to find yourself a new band. It's a song that George did on his 1974 tour, where he changed the arrangement to a sort of a funky sort of song, and by that time the Beatles had sort of resolved their case, and they were now reunited against Klein, and he changed the lyrics to bring your lawyers and I'll bring Klein. And it's a great song, and it's a song that I really enjoy. And when you do these deep dive videos into albums, you kind of reappraise things. And a few months ago I did a video which was my top 50 George Harrison songs, and I left this song off it. Well, I've got a different opinion of it now. So it just goes to show, when you do these ranking videos, things can change over time. So for this video, I'm giving Sue Me, Sue You Blues 9 out of 10. Couple of fun facts. George wanted Sue Me, Sue You Blues to be the opening track on the album. And when they released the UK cassette of Living in the Material World, he got his wish, because they used to mess around with the track listing to make the tape length roughly the same on both sides, so you didn't have to forward it too much before you turned the cassette over. Now, track 3, The Light That Has Lighted the World, that was going to be the title track from the album originally. That was what the album was going to be called, but George obviously did a U-turn on that. But the track, The Light That Has Lighted the World, I think is probably my favourite track on the album. When I did my top 50 George Harrison songs of all time video a few months ago, this made the top 20. It was number 19, and it is a superb song, and it's the sort of song that I can imagine that if you had All Things Must Pass without all the muddy production and the huge great big lineup of musicians on that album, this track would have fitted perfectly on it, because it's a very sort of All Things Must Pass-esque track, I think. And obviously here it's a much more scaled down lineup and production, and it's all the better for it. Superb piano-led ballad, Nicky Hopkins playing a lovely piano solo after the first verse, and that's followed by a superb slide guitar solo from George as well. Now the lyrics, they sort of tell about how George is kind of upset that people can't accept that he's changed into this spiritual being that he is now, and not Beatle George. I've heard that some people have said that I've changed, how I'm not what I was, how it really is a shame. But then later in the verse, he then celebrates those that do accept him as being this spiritual person that he is now. I'm grateful to anyone who is happy and free for giving me hope while looking to see the light that has lighted the world. It's a beautiful song, a beautiful, beautiful song, and I love it. And I'm giving it 10 out of 10. So track 4 is Don't Let Me Wait Too Long. And this is a great pop song with a very strong, memorable melody, almost McCartney-esque, if you like. Lyrically, it's a little bit sparse. It's only really got one verse and one chorus that just get repeated over and over again. Production wise, it's got a little bit of reverb on it, quite a lot of reverb on it actually, which makes it a little bit Phil Spector-ish. It's not fully blown Spector, but it has got touches of Spector's production on it. In fact, he uses 2 drummers, Ringo's on this, and that was always a trick that Spector liked to employ. Ringo plays on this track, one of 3 tracks that he plays on this album. He plays in tandem with Jim Keltner, like they did on the concert for Bangladesh. Now, this song was going to be the second single from the album, but it was kind of withdrawn at the last minute. It even had an Apple number. I don't really know the reason why it was withdrawn. If you do, stick it down in the comments. But surely it would have been a hit if it had been released as a single. It reminds me a little bit of Blow Away from the George Harrison album in the way that it's very melodic and very upbeat, and I like it, and I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. Track 5 is the absolutely gorgeous ballad Who Can See It. Now, this is a kind of song of celebration and liberation. Again, he's harking back to his Beatles past, and he's talking about being free from the constraints of that. I've been held up, I've been run down. I can see quite clearly through those years when I played at Towing the Line, and then later in the song he sings, my life belongs to me, my love belongs to who can see it. So those that can celebrate this freedom with him and not harking back to being a Beatle. It's a song about that liberation for where he can now be his own man with his own songs, and a celebration of that. And an absolutely gorgeous ballad, superbly played, a fantastic vocal from George, one of his best during his solo career. It's got strings on it, it's got horns on it, it's got choir, all that orchestration arranged by John Barnum, who did the same on All Things Must Pass. As I say, it's a gorgeous ballad. I love that twinkly piano that is through it, and the song just ends with a couple of twinkly piano bits. It's a great song, and I'm going to give it 9. I'm going to give it 9. It deserves it. So the final track on side 1 is the title track, Living in the Material World. And this is probably the most rock and roll song on the album. And the idea behind the song is that George is talking about the material world that we all live in, the world of possessions and money and that sort of thing, and the spiritual world, which is the world that he wants to end up in. And this is demonstrated quite beautifully, really, by the rock parts that segue, seamlessly into the Indian parts, which represent the spiritual world. Now, musically, this is really interesting. Ringo is on the track. He plays drums with Jim Keltner, and he's playing that sort of galloping beat that he played on the song Get Back, a slightly slower tempo to Get Back, but it's the same beat. And yet again, George is harking back to his Beatle days. Met them all here in the material world. John and Paul here in the material world. Though we started off quite poor, we met Richie on a tour. And at that point, Ringo comes in with a very Ringo-esque sort of drum fill, just to labour the point. But the interesting part about that particular verse is that despite all the court cases and the arguments and the falling out and everything, the line that precedes that verse, so I the last line of the previous verse, is met my friends here in the material world, and then he talks about his 3 ex-bandmates. Now, again, musically, George, fantastic slide guitar. We've got a fantastic sax solo from Jim Horn, who also plays those really delicate little flute parts in the Indian music sections. And in those Indian music sections, George plays a sort of a droning sitar note, and that's the first time that he's played sitar on a record for a very long time. I think this is a really interesting track. I like the way it sort of breaks down, builds up, goes into the Indian bits, goes back into the rock bits. Very interesting. I'm going to give this one 9 out of 10. This is a great side. Living in the Material World, side 1, fantastic. Side 2 opens with The Lord Loves the One That Loves the Lord. And musically, this is a bit of a foot tapper. It features some fantastic slide guitar from George, as this whole album does. But lyrically, this track is an absolute stinker. It's very sanctimonious. It's very preachy and holier than thou. And I don't like that in pop music. The Lord loves the one that loves the Lord, and the law says if you don't give, then you don't get loving, which doesn't sound very Christian to me. And in fact, it's not. The lyric is from the Krishna scriptures, not the Christian scriptures. But it goes on. The Lord helps those that help themselves. And the Lord says whatever you do is going to come right back at you. And that's about karma, and that's supposed to scare us. And it doesn't, but it just puts our back up. And the lyrics, the bad lyrics go on. He talks about the leaders of all nations are acting like big girls, which is also a terrible lyric. This is the start of a downturn on the record, and I'm going to give this song just 6 out of 10, and that's really for the musical content, because for me the lyrics are totally disposable. And don't give me that dirty look, George. So next up is Be Here Now, and this is a funny one for me because I kind of acknowledge that it's a really delicate, dreamy ballad. It's just sort of very stripped back arrangement, just acoustic guitar and piano with a sitar sort of droning all the way through it, and George's vocals sort of double tracked in places. But for me, at 4 minutes, it kind of drags. The song drags. It takes a full minute for George to get to line 2 of the lyric, and 2 minutes for him to get to line 6. And I just want it to pick up a little bit of momentum. I just find it drags, and that makes it less enjoyable for me. So I'm just going to give this one 6.5 out of 10. I think I prefer the Oasis album of the same name, and that really drags along as well. Track 3 on side 2 is Try Some, Buy Some. This was a song that was first tried out during the All Things Must Pass sessions and left off. It was then decided that it was going to be given to Ronnie Spector as her comeback single, and the music for this track was recorded in 1971. George used Jim Gordon, who was on the All Things Must Pass sessions, on drums on this, and Leon Russell plays piano, and Pete Ham from Badfinger is on acoustic guitar on this as well, although not credited on the album. Now the song is a kind of anti-drug song. It kind of moans about the drug use in the music business, and George sings, you know, I saw big fry, I see men die to get high, and he's talking about musicians there. But on the other hand, he's saying that when he was using drugs, it kind of opened his eyes to God and helped him sort of discover his religious beliefs. Now, one of the criticisms of this song was that because they used the original music that was recorded for Ronnie Spector and didn't really change it, it's in Ronnie Spector's key, which is a bit high for George to sing. But I think he handles the vocal on this quite well, and it's a good song. And David Bowie thought it was a good enough song to record for his A Reality album in 2003, and I actually saw him do this live on this tour that Bowie did to support that album. I inexplicably missed this out of my top 50 George Harrison songs of all time video that I did a few months ago. If I was doing that now, I would include it, and I'm going to give this one 8 out of 10. Moving on to the penultimate track, The Day the World Gets Round, and this is another really melodic, delicate ballad with a great message. And from this song, I kind of take it as a little bit of a follow-on from John's Imagine. It's kind of got the same sentiment, you know, sort of lamenting human behaviour and sort of asking for a bit of humility from people. The day the world gets round to understanding where it's at, using all it's found to help each other hand in hand. It's a great message. It's a great melody, beautifully played, beautifully produced. It's a great song, and I'm giving it 8. And so we arrive at the final song on the album. That is all, the album closer. And it's a big statement closer, much in the same way as Hear Me Lord was a big statement closer on All Things Must Pass. And by that, I kind of mean that it's the sort of song that you can't imagine to be anywhere else on the album but the final song. And it's fitting for that place. It's a sort of another big ballad. It's got strings on it and choirs. They're arranged by John Barnum. George does a lovely little guitar solo in the middle, and it's beautifully sung as well, with nice heartfelt words as well. And I'm going to give that one 8 out of 10 as well. And that is all. So my overall thoughts on Living in the Material World is that, having done this deep dive review, I've kind of got a different perspective of this album than the one that I've had for the last 40 years, and it's taken me a little bit by surprise at how highly I've scored some of these songs. Now, I've spoken to you before about how this isn't the perfect way of reviewing an album or ranking an album against other albums, because, you know, sometimes the whole of the album is bigger than its constituent parts. But in this case, I feel like the constituent parts of this album are bigger than the album itself, and that's kind of led to this getting quite a high score, because this album is a lot of George's religious beliefs. When you listen to the album as a whole, it can become a little bit too much when you listen to track after track after track of George talking about God and his spirituality and all that sort of thing. Now, I'm absolutely fine with George talking about his spirituality as long as he's not being judgy or preachy, and he does get a little bit like that in some of these songs, and those are the songs that I favour less. But you know, All Things Must Pass also had quite a lot of spiritual songs on it, and that never gets accused of being preachy. And so I think that this album has had kind of some bad press in the past. Now, the album, the musicianship on the album is absolutely first class, as is the production. I mean, the production on this album is much better than Phil Spector's production on All Things Must Pass for a kickoff. And I feel that when George came into recording this album, he was absolutely on top of his game. You know, he was riding high on the success of All Things Must Pass. He was riding high on the success of the concert for Bangladesh. So the expectations on this album were huge, and I think that kind of contributed to the sort of the mediocre reviews that it got. So that's my overall view of Living in the Material World, but I think that this is a good album. So let's see how we did with the scoring. So the album scored 91 points, and there are 11 tracks on the album, giving an average score for the album of 8.27. So we're going to bung that into Beatles Tone's great big album review ranking chart and see where it comes. And we can see from here that it's moved into third place. It's gone above Help, it's gone above Let It Be, and that will surprise some people. Now, obviously, I don't expect everyone to agree with my review of Living in the Material World. In fact, if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I wouldn't have agreed with me either. But there you go. That's what happens when you do a deep dive into an album and listen to it 3 or 4 times on the spin. So please do tell me what you think about this album. I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to know your opinions on the album and on the ranking. So do tell me down in the comments. Now, we're just over a week away from the Revolver box sets arriving. I'm obviously going to be doing the unboxing. I'm going to be doing the CD Super Deluxe box set and the LP Super Deluxe box set and the picture disc. And I'm going to do a very special video, one that I've never done on a new release before. So please stay tuned for that. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. That would be absolutely marvellous. Because the Revolver album is going to be with us very soon, I will be doing the next deep dive review will be on the Revolver album, and then we'll bung it into Beatles Tone's great big album review ranking table. So please stay tuned for that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.